Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. This time we will be doing the Mirror Dungeon 3 normal mode with Cinq Don. I would wait for the hard dungeon to release before, as with what little testing I've done, aside from a few legitimately impossible nodes, it's relatively easy. But with how the next new identities will be from the Cinq Association, I wanted to do a run before they were released. Cinq Don is a very unique unit, as before the new Cinq IDs there were none like her. All of her skills scale off of clashing and speed, something that no other IDs do. Her base stats also reflect this, with a -2 defense level but very high speed at 4 to 7 and a high offense level at +4. She's meant to be used as a hyper-offensive DPS unit who doesn't have much in the way of support, but honestly doesn't even need it. Her skill 1, Remise, is a 2-coin lust skill that rolls 4 to 10, and if she's at 7+ speed, it gains 2 coin power, bumping its roll up to 14. Also, if she wins a clash with it, not only will she gain haste, but the second coin will also inflict bind next turn. If you don't have her other skills, you definitely want to be clashing with this one, otherwise it doesn't really do much. Her skill 2, Flesh, is a 2-coin gloom skill which rolls a 5 to 15, and will give +2 haste next turn, as well as dealing up to 50% bonus damage depending on how many times you clash with the same skill. It also has the same coin effect as her skill 1, except it's not reliant on winning a clash. Her skill 3, Salut, is a 2-coin pride skill, rolling 6 to 18, but can go up to 24 if at 10+ speed, which can only happen if you have haste. It has the same effect as skill 2, giving extra damage based on the clash, but it goes up to 100% instead. The most notable thing, however, is the unique status effect that this skill inflicts, Declared Duel. When she clashes with an enemy that has this status, she gains 1 clash power and can gain up to 4 haste a turn from successful attacks. This of course has a compounding effect, as the more clashes she wins, the faster she'll get, which will let her win more clashes and deal even more damage. Her defense skill is pretty average, being a Pride 4 to 14 evade. That makes the target lose sanity on dodge. It's nothing interesting, but any identity with an evade is already at an advantage when soloing. Her passive, A Noble Duel, is activated on Pride Resonance, and is yet another example as to why speed is so important. Depending on the differential between her speed and the enemy's, she will do up to 30% extra damage, which in combination with the bonus damage from her skills can make her reach some ridiculous numbers. The last thing to point out is that with her Sin distribution, she can perfectly fuel all of her egos, except for Telepool, which is fine as you'd rather be running Fluid Sac anyways. Any identity that fuels their own egos also gets a bonus, as it makes the early game for soloing much easier. Moving on to the run itself, the main difference between Mirror Dungeon 2 and 3 is that in this one, without the buffs, soloing is slightly harder, but with easier access to ego gifts, you can very quickly spiral out of control into the realm of being unstoppable. To start the run, seeing as how none of the regular options would benefit Dawn at all, I choose the random ego gifts and ended up getting the Phlebotomy Pack and Scarlet Moths. Phlebotomy Pack is useful for early game healing, and Scarlet Moths is just a really good ego gift, and definitely prevented some damage by staggering certain enemies at the perfect moment. The first ego gift we get is Coffee and Cranes, allowing us to fuel our support passives and get all their benefits. Speaking of support passives, they're all pretty standard, using all the damage reduction and healing passives we can, plus anything that will boost our damage. The only one of significant note is W Korpong Lu, who if we have 5 charge will give us 2 haste. This of course is reliant on charge gifts, but I don't think we get any this run, so it's ultimately pointless. At the first shop we pick up Bloody Gadget and Lithograph, for even more healing and a permanent 30% damage boost. Bloody Gadget is honestly one of the best gifts for soloing, as it is just a free damage boost, even more when you have a lust skill like we do. The first boss is against Marile and his cronies. Starting off, we use Fluid Sac to not only deal damage and hopefully stagger them, but also to deal sanity damage, so if they weren't staggered, they would be less likely to land favorable coin rolls. This is also the first fight where we see how good Scarlet Moths actually is, as it staggers an enemy that wouldn't have been staggered otherwise. We get a really good gift as a reward, Sticky Muck, making all of our pierce attacks inflict defense down, but it's tied to a 15% enemy blunt damage buff, which I don't believe is ever worth to take, as giving enemies that much free damage when soloing is generally not worth it. So instead we take the Curriculum Vitae. Going through the second floor, we obtain Ashes to Ashes, and at the rest stop we upgrade the Bloody Gadget only once, as the second upgrade is useless when soloing. And combine Ashes to Ashes in the Phlebotomy pack to get Helterfly's Dream. Moving on to the second boss, we encounter the Ebony Queen's Apple. A relatively easy fight as we just evade most of its attacks and focus down individual parts until eventually we do enough damage to finish it off. The rewards aren't that great, so we just take homeward and move on. Floor 3 has virtually no fights to speak of, so let's do a flash round. The shop gives us a skill swap letting us change a skill 1 for skill 3, as well as the Pendant of Nostalgia and Prejudice. The next two events give us Melted Eyeball and Green Spirit, both useless, so we fuse them in the rest stop to get Skeletal Crumbs, which is also useless. We upgrade the pendant once, as just like the Bloody Gadget, the next upgrade doesn't do anything for soloing. And the last event gives us the Voodoo Doll. The next boss is that So No One Will Cry, which is almost identical to the previous boss. You just dodge all of his attacks and focus yours on a single part, clashing with one of his defense skills when he uses it to severely cripple him the next turn. This makes short work of him, making it so that we would have been able to beat him without taking any damage whatsoever, if not for some unlucky evade rolls. We are rewarded with Phantom Pain, giving us slightly more damage and giving enemies healing on hit. Floor 4 is much like the third, having very few fights, so quickly running through we get Blood, Sweat and Tears, Grimy Iron Stake, Grand Welcome, and Thunder Branch from the regular nodes. The shop gives us Sticky Muck, the gift we skipped earlier, 4-leaf Clover, which turns us into a pseudo-poise character in combination with the pendant, and Late Bloomer's Tattoo. The final boss we come across is Fairy Longlegs. Yet again, he's virtually identical to the other two fights. Evade all his attacks and focus down a single body part, which he makes incredibly easy by only using skills on his arm. And that's basically it. A successful Cinq Don Mirror Dungeon 3 solo. Honestly, a little underwhelming. I'm not sure if that's because of how powerful she is, or if without it being hard mode, I don't really find it too challenging. Either way, I'm glad to say, even without all the buffs, soloing is still very much possible. My next run will likely be with Sinclair whenever he releases. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video and want to see more, consider giving it a like and subscribing. Also, if this video gets to 100 likes, I'll revisit this run and do it in the hard version when it releases. Thanks again, and goodbye.